welcome to Business English Podcast. Today, we're going deep on something that I think a lot of people in business kind of struggle with sometimes.
Yeah.
It's how to talk about budget limitations professionally.
Yeah. It's something we all encounter
For sure.
in the workplace.
Whether you're managing a team or pitching an idea,
Right.
or even like trying to get approval for a new piece of software or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've got a stack of sources here.
Yeah.
Articles, podcasts, descriptions, expert advice, all about how to handle these conversations with finesse.
Yeah, and you know what I thought was really interesting is that a lot of the sources emphasize that these budget discussions aren't just about saying no or focusing on what you can't do.
Yeah, so it's about more than just the numbers.
Exactly. It's about reframing the conversation entirely. Instead of dwelling on the limitations,
Okay.
the focus should be on finding strategic alignment.
Yeah.
You know, exploring creative solutions
Yeah.
and ultimately optimizing the resources you do have.
So instead of kind of hitting a brick wall, it becomes more of a collaborative problem-solving session.
Precisely. And that shift in perspective can make all the difference in how those conversations unfold and the results you achieve.
Got it.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
One source used a phrase that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
It said, mastering the language of constraints.
Ooh.
Sounds almost like you're learning a secret code.
It is in a way. You know, it's about understanding the subtle ways language can shape perceptions and influence outcomes in these discussions.
Okay.
You know, for example, instead of bluntly stating, we don't have the money for that,
Right.
you might say, we need to ensure our resources are aligned with our top strategic priorities.
Okay, so it's about choosing your words carefully to convey the message in a more strategic and professional way.
Exactly. It's about speaking the language of business and framing the conversation in a way that resonates with decision makers.
Now, there's also this technique called the sandwich technique, which I've heard about in other communication contexts.
Yeah.
But how does that apply to budget conversations?
It's a brilliant strategy for delivering potentially tough news in a constructive way.
Okay.
You start by acknowledging the value of the proposal or idea being presented. Maybe you highlight its strengths or the potential benefits it offers.
So you start with a positive note.
Right. Then you introduce the budget constraints, explaining why they exist and the impact they have on the decision-making process.
So you're not shying away from the limitations, but presenting them in a clear and understandable way.
Exactly. But here's the crucial part. You immediately pivot to exploring alternative solutions or options that might be more feasible within the budget.
So instead of a dead end, it becomes a collaborative search for a different path forward.
Exactly. The sandwich technique keeps the conversation focused on solutions and possibilities, even when budget constraints are a factor.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, something else that really stood out to me is how navigating budget discussions across cultures can be incredibly complex.
Absolutely. What might be considered direct and efficient in one culture could be perceived as blunt or even disrespectful in another.
Right.
For instance, while some cultures value straightforward talk about money matters, others may find it confrontational or even taboo.
So how do you approach these conversations when working with international colleagues or clients?
Sensitivity is key.
Okay.
Do your research beforehand to understand the communication norms and cultural nuances of the people you're working with. Pay attention to nonverbal cues, tone of voice, and the level of formality expected in their communication style.
It's almost like you need to become a cultural detective to make sure your message is being received in the intended way.
That's a great analogy. And remember, this cultural awareness applies to written communication as well.
Yeah.
An email that might seem perfectly polite in one context could come across as overly casual or even demanding in another.
That makes me think about all the communication that happens digitally these days. Our sources really emphasize the unique challenges of discussing budget limitations in emails, instant messages, and virtual meetings.
It's a whole different landscape. You know,
Yeah.
in face-to-face conversations, you have body language and tone of voice to help you convey your message.
For sure.
But in the digital world, it's all about choosing your words carefully
Right.
and using the right tools to ensure clarity and understanding.
So with email, for example, you might need to be more explicit in explaining your reasoning and avoiding any language that could be misinterpreted.
Exactly. And in virtual meetings, using visual aids like charts or graphs can be incredibly helpful in conveying budget information in a concise and digestible way.
Visuals are so helpful.
It's about adapting your communication strategies to fit the medium.
It seems like timing also plays a crucial role, especially when working across time zones.
Absolutely. You want to avoid sending important budget-related messages late at night or on weekends
Right.
when they might be missed or cause unnecessary anxiety.
This is already so much more nuanced than I ever realized.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how many layers there are to these seemingly simple budget conversations.
And we've only just begun.
Ah,
Next, we'll delve into strategies for handling crisis communication situations.
okay.
Those unexpected budget cuts or financial emergencies, that
Yeah.
can really throw a wrench in the works.
That sounds intense.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things we'll be exploring in that section?
We'll be looking at frameworks like the CARE approach, which focuses on providing context, outlining actions, offering reassurance, and encouraging engagement to navigate those difficult situations effectively.
I'm ready to unpack that.
Yeah.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface of this topic, and I'm eager to dive deeper into these strategies.
Let's do it.
All right, crisis communication.
Yeah.
Let's imagine a company suddenly loses a major client,
Okay.
leading to budget freezes across departments.
Yeah.
How would you approach that?
Well, it's all about, staying calm,
Mm-hmm.
leading with a clear plan.
Okay.
One of our sources highlighted the CARE framework: context, action, reassurance, and engagement.
Context, action, reassurance, and engagement.
And it's surprisingly effective for situations like this.
Okay, break that down for me.
Okay.
What does context mean in this scenario?
So context is all about transparency.
Okay.
Explain the situation honestly.
Okay.
The client lost the impact on the budget and why these freezes are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
People are more understanding when they see the full picture.
So no sugarcoating.
Yeah.
Just clear facts.
Exactly. Then comes action.
Okay.
Outline the specific steps being taken to address the situation.
Okay.
Are you diversifying the client base? Cutting non-essential spending, showing that there's a plan, inspires confidence.
It's about moving forward strategically, not just reacting to the crisis.
Right, and this leads naturally into reassurance.
Okay.
Address people's concerns directly.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledge the anxieties these freezes might cause,
Right.
but emphasize the company's commitment to its employees and its long-term vision.
So it's about maintaining morale during a potentially stressful time.
Absolutely, and finally, engagement.
Okay.
This is where you open the floor for questions, feedback, and suggestions.
Okay.
Make people feel heard, even if you don't have all the answers right away.
It sounds like fostering a sense of unity and shared responsibility, even amidst a crisis.
That's the heart of it. The CARE framework reminds us that even in tough financial times, clear, empathetic communication can make all the difference.
Our sources also talk about the importance of word choice in these situations.
Oh, for sure.
Are there any examples of how even small changes in wording can impact how the message is received?
Absolutely. Instead of budget cuts, which sounds harsh and permanent,
Yeah.
you might say temporary resource reallocation.
Okay.
It emphasizes the strategic nature of the changes and suggests that things will eventually return to normal.
It's about framing the situation in a more positive and hopeful light, even when things are tough.
Precisely. And speaking of being prepared, another interesting concept that came up was the idea of pre-crisis pulse checks.
Pre-crisis pulse checks. What are those?
So it's basically checking the temperature of the organization before any official announcement.
Okay.
You might informally gather feedback from different teams about their current workload, potential concerns, or suggestions for improvement.
So it's like gathering intelligence to anticipate potential reactions and tailor your communication accordingly.
Exactly. It allows you to address concerns proactively and craft a message that resonates with everyone.
I see.
One source even recommended having a budget communication contingency plan.
Like a fire drill, but for financial situations.
Precisely. Even if you don't know the exact nature of the crisis, having a framework in place for how to communicate effectively can save you time and stress when things get challenging.
I really like this idea of being proactive and prepared.
Me too. And it's not just about the practicalities, it's about the mindset.
Okay.
One source talked about a bridge-building approach to communicating during budget crises.
Bridge building.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing. What does that involve?
So instead of focusing solely on the negative aspects of the situation, you create verbal bridges connecting the current challenges to future opportunities.
Okay.
Acknowledge the difficulties, but emphasize the potential for growth, innovation, or even a stronger, more resilient company.
So it's about finding the silver lining, even in a storm cloud.
Exactly. Maintain a sense of hope and optimism even when making tough financial decisions. It can make all the difference in how people perceive and respond to the situation.
All these strategies sound great in theory,
Yeah.
but I'm curious, how do they actually play out in real-world situations?
Right.
Do Do you have any examples of how these communication techniques have worked in practice?
We do. Our sources offer some fascinating case studies and real-world examples that we can dive into next.
Perfect. I'm eager to see how these strategies work in practice and what lessons we can learn from their successes and even their failures.
Let's explore those examples.
All right, let's get into those real-world scenarios.
Okay.
One source mentioned a project manager who had to announce a 30% budget reduction to her team.
Oh, wow.
That sounds incredibly daunting.
Yeah, it was a tough situation, but, instead of creating panic or resentment, her communication style actually fostered a spirit of innovation and collaboration.
That's impressive. How did she manage that? What specific techniques did she use?
She used something called the empowerment language pattern.
Okay.
Instead of dwelling on the negative we have to cut costs, she reframed it as a challenge.
Okay.
We have an opportunity to reimagine how we allocate our resources to achieve maximum impact.
That's a brilliant way to shift the perspective from limitation to possibility.
Exactly, and her team responded incredibly well.
Wow.
They felt empowered to contribute ideas and find creative solutions within the new constraints.
That's great.
They saw it as a chance to prove their resourcefulness and commitment to the project.
It's amazing how the right language can make such a difference in how people perceive and respond to a situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was another example from a marketing agency that faced budget limitations from a client. Instead of simply saying, "We can't do everything you want with this budget,"
Right.
they took a more strategic approach.
I'm curious to hear how they handled that. What did they do?
They implemented what they called priority-based budgeting language.
Okay.
They would say something like, "Let's work together to identify which elements of the campaign will deliver the greatest impact within your current investment parameters."
That's a great way to involve the client in the decision-making process and make them feel like they're still getting the most value for their money, even with a reduced budget.
Precisely. It shifts the focus from what you can't do to what you can achieve together.
These examples are inspiring.
Yeah.
They really highlight how effective communication can turn potentially negative situations into opportunities for collaboration and creative problem solving.
For sure.
But what about those really tough conversations like vendor negotiations, where you have to push back on pricing?
Oh, yeah. Those can be tricky, but there are definitely ways to handle them professionally and effectively. One source described a procurement manager who used something called partnership dialogue in her negotiations.
Partnership dialogue.
Yeah.
What does that entail?
Instead of simply stating her budget limits or being confrontational, she would open the conversation by saying something like, "We're looking to optimize our investment while maintaining our high-quality standards. How can we work together to achieve this?"
That's a smart approach. You're inviting the vendor to be a part of the solution rather than framing them as an adversary.
Exactly. It's about fostering a collaborative spirit and finding a win-win solution that benefits both parties.
Yeah.
In this case, it led to the vendor proposing a more cost-effective solution that actually exceeded everyone's expectations.
It's amazing how these real-world examples really bring to life the power of communication in navigating budget conversations. It's not just about the numbers. It's about building relationships, understanding perspectives, and finding creative solutions together.
I completely agree. And it's important to remember that even when we have all the right strategies in place, things don't always go perfectly.
Oh, for sure.
We're all human.
Yeah,
We're bound to make mistakes sometimes.
absolutely. I've certainly had my share of budget conversations that haven't gone as smoothly as I'd hoped.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how to recover from those situations?
Well, one source told a story about a CFO who completely fumbled his first major budget cut announcement.
Oh, no.
He was too abrupt, didn't provide enough context,
Okay.
and ended up creating a lot of anxiety and confusion.
Ouch, that sounds rough. So how did he turn things around?
He used a technique called transparent recalibration.
Okay.
He acknowledged his missteps, genuinely listened to the feedback he received, and then adjusted his approach based on what he learned.
So it's about being open to feedback,
Yeah.
willing to admit when you've made a mistake, and then making a conscious effort to do better next time.
Exactly. And in that CFO's case, his transparency and willingness to learn actually strengthened his team's trust in him.
Interesting.
They saw that he was human, that he cared about their concerns, and that he was committed to getting things right.
That's a powerful lesson. It's not about being perfect. It's about being authentic, adaptable, and always striving to improve our communication skills.
Well said, and I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Budget conversations can be challenging, but with the right mindset, strategies, and a commitment to clear and empathetic communication, they can become opportunities for collaboration, innovation, and even stronger relationships.
This deep dive has been so insightful. We've learned so much about framing conversations, mastering the language of constraints, navigating cultural differences, handling crisis situations, and so much more.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you.
Likewise.
I hope our listeners feel empowered to approach their next budget conversation with confidence and a fresh perspective.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into mastering budget conversations. We hope you found it valuable. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your colleagues. And be sure to leave a comment with your biggest takeaway from today's discussion. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of business English.